Mrs. Hartley. The voice came from somewhere to her left, crisp and professional. Can you tell me what happened? Sophie's tongue felt thick, her mouth full of copper. She worked to focus on the young doctor standing beside her bed, his pen poised over a clipboard. Behind him, a nurse with kind brown eyes and graying hair at her temples was adjusting the IV drip, but her gaze kept flicking to Sophie with an intensity that didn't match her gentle movements. I fell, Sophie whispered, the lie tasting like ash. The same lie she'd told 3 times before. The same lie that had gotten her exactly nowhere, except back in this nightmare. The doctor's expression remained neutral, professionally blank, but something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment? Or maybe just resignation. Fell down the stairs again? Again. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Yes, her voice cracked. Through the narrow gap in the privacy curtain, she could see Marcus standing in the hallway, his expensive suit immaculate, his posture relaxed. He was on his phone, laughing about something, as if his wife wasn't lying 10 feet away with a concussion and 3 cracked ribs. As if he hadn't slammed her head against the marble kitchen counter just 4 hours earlier because dinner was late. As if the bruises blooming purple and yellow across her torso were just an unfortunate accident. He looked up then, catching her eye through the gap. His smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold and flat. A warning. She looked away quickly, her heart hammering against those damaged ribs. The doctor made a note on his chart. You're quite accident-prone, Mrs. Hartley. Another note. Another meaningless record in a file that would be closed and forgotten. Sophie felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She couldn't cry. Not here. Not where Marcus could see. He hated when she cried in public. I'll write you a prescription for the pain, the doctor continued, his voice already distant, already moving on to the next patient, the next problem that actually had a solution. The nurse will give you discharge instructions. Try to be more careful on those stairs. He left, his shoes squeaking on the linoleum, taking with him any fragile hope Sophie had been harboring that someone, anyone, might actually see what was happening to her. The nurse remained. She said nothing, just continued her methodical check of Sophie's vitals, but her jaw was tight, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. When she leaned over to examine the pupil response in Sophie's eyes, she was close enough that Sophie could smell her perfume, something floral and comforting, like someone's grandmother. Accidental fall, the nurse murmured so quietly Sophie almost missed it. That's what I'm writing on the chart. That's what the record will say. She paused, her fingers gentle on Sophie's wrist as she checked her pulse. But we both know that's not what happened, don't we, sweetheart? Sophie's breath caught. The nurse's eyes, up close, weren't just kind. They were knowing. They were angry. I can't, Sophie whispered. You don't understand. Marcus is very well connected. His family, I know exactly who the Hartleys are, the nurse interrupted quietly. Old money, real estate empire. Untouchable. She adjusted the blanket over Sophie's legs with careful precision. I also know that in 6 months, if you keep going like this, you'll be in the morgue instead of the ER. And they'll probably write accidental fall on that report too. The words hit Sophie like a physical blow. 6 months. Was that really all she had left? There's nothing anyone can do, Sophie said, and hated how defeated she sounded. I've tried. I went to the police once. Marcus's father plays golf with the police chief. They took my statement and then called Marcus to come pick me up. He was so apologetic, so concerned. Told them I'd been under a lot of stress, that I'd been making up stories for attention. Her laugh was bitter. By the time we got home, I'd learned what he did to liars. The nurse's expression hardened. She straightened, glancing toward the curtain where Marcus's shadow was still visible in the hallway. Then she pulled her phone from her pocket, her movements quick and decisive. What are you doing? Sophie asked, alarm spiking through her. Something I probably shouldn't. The nurse's fingers flew across the screen. But I've been a nurse for 32 years, and I've seen too many women die because the system failed them. I'm not watching it happen again." "You can't call the police," Sophie said urgently. "I told you, it won't." "I'm not calling the police." The nurse hit a final button and lifted the phone to her ear. "I'm calling someone who actually gets things done." Sophie wanted to ask who, wanted to protest, but the medication they'd given her was pulling at the edges of her consciousness, making everything feel slow and syrupy. She heard the phone ring once, twice. Then a man's voice, deep and rough, answered with a single word. "Rose." "Victor," the nurse said, and her voice had changed, become softer and more urgent. "I need you to come to Providence General, 4th floor, bed 12. And Victor? It's bad. The husband's here. Rich, connected, thinks he's untouchable." A pause. "Name's Marcus Hartley." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, Sophie thought the connection had dropped. Then that deep voice spoke again, and something in its tone made the hair on the back of her neck stand up, despite her pain. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Keep her safe, Rose." The nurse, Rose, ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. She looked down at Sophie with an expression that was somehow both apologetic and fiercely protective. "Who did you just call?" Sophie managed to ask. "My nephew," Rose said simply. "And before you ask, no, he's not a cop or a lawyer or any kind of person who plays by the rules the Hartleys think protect them." She smoothed Sophie's hair back from her forehead with a gentleness that made Sophie's throat tight. "He's someone who understands that sometimes the only way to stop a monster is with someone the monster is actually afraid of." "I don't understand." Rose's smile was small and grim. "You will. Victor doesn't let people hurt women. Not in his city. And he especially doesn't let them get away with it." She glanced toward the curtain again. "Your husband is about to learn that being well-connected only matters if you're connected to the right people. And the Hartleys, powerful as they think they are very much connected to the wrong ones." Sophie wanted to argue, wanted to say that nothing would change, that she'd heard promises before, and they always ended the same way, with Marcus's hands around her throat and his voice in her ear telling her that no one would ever believe her, that no one would ever help her, that she was his and his alone. But the medication was winning now, dragging her down into cotton-wrapped darkness. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was Rose's voice, steady and sure. "Hold on, sweetheart. Help is coming. Real help this time." Sophie woke to the sound of raised voices. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The unfamiliar ceiling tiles, the antiseptic smell, the distant beeping of monitors. It all seemed wrong. Dreamlike. Then pain rolled through her body in a nauseating wave, and memory crashed back. Hospital. Marcus. The nurse who'd made that phone call. The voices were coming from somewhere beyond the privacy curtain. One of them was Marcus, his tone sharp with irritation barely masked by false charm. "I appreciate your concern, but my wife needs rest, not visitors. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave." "No." The second voice was unfamiliar, a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate in Sophie's chest even through the curtain. "You're the one who's leaving?" "I beg your pardon?" Marcus's voice climbed an octave, disbelief warring with outrage. "Do you have any idea who I am? This is my wife. I'll call security." "Call them." There was something almost amused in the stranger's tone. But it was the kind of amusement a cat might feel watching a mouse threaten to fight back. "Tell them Victor Volkov is here. See what they do." The silence that followed was so complete, Sophie could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She knew that name. Everyone in the city knew that name, even if it was only whispered in certain circles, in hushed tones when people thought no one was listening. Victor Volkov. The man who controlled half the city's underground operations. The man politicians and police commissioners and CEOs courted and feared in equal measure. The man who, according to rumor, had once made an entire rival organization disappear in a single night for touching one of his people. "You can't be serious," Marcus said, but his voice had changed. The confidence had drained out of it, replaced by something Sophie had never heard from him before. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. "This is absurd. What does someone like you want with my wife?" "Someone like me?" The dark amusement in Victor's voice deepened. "You mean someone who doesn't take kindly to men who beat their wives? Someone who thinks a man who hurts a defenseless woman is worth less than the dirt under my shoes?" A pause, heavy with threat. "You're standing between me and someone who needs my protection. Move, or I'll move you. Your choice." Sophie's hands clenched in the thin hospital sheets. She should be afraid. Everything she'd ever heard about Viktor Volkov should be terrifying her right now. But instead, beneath the pain and the medication-induced fog, something else stirred. Something that felt almost like hope. "This is harassment," Marcus tried. But he was backing down. Sophie could hear it in his voice. "I'll have my lawyers. Your lawyers can send their complaints to my office. I'm sure my people will enjoy the laugh." Footsteps, deliberate and unhurried, moving closer. "Last chance, Hartley. Walk away, while you still can." A long moment of silence, then Marcus's voice, tight with barely controlled fury. "This isn't over." "Yes," Victor said quietly. "It is." More footsteps, retreating this time. The automatic doors at the end of the hallway whooshed open and closed. Then the curtain around Sophie's bed swept aside, and she found herself looking up at the man Rose had called. Viktor Volkov was not what she expected. Oh, he was dangerous. That was immediately apparent in every line of his body. In the way he moved with the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to question whether he was the deadliest person in any given room. But he was younger than she'd imagined. Maybe late 30s, with dark hair pushed back from a face that would have been almost beautiful, if not for the hardness in his ice-blue eyes and the thin scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. He wore an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than Sophie's car, but somehow he made it look dangerous rather than refined. He studied her for a long moment, and Sophie found she couldn't look away from his gaze. Those eyes took in everything. The bruises she knew were visible on her face and arms, the careful way she was breathing to avoid stressing her damaged ribs, the fear she couldn't quite hide despite the strange hope blooming in her chest. "Sophie Hartley," he said, and his voice without the cold threat he'd used on Marcus was surprisingly gentle. "Rose called me. She seems to think you need help." Sophie's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I don't know what she told you, but I can't pay you. Whatever your rate is, I don't have access to that kind of money. Marcus controls all the finances." Something flickered across Victor's face. Not anger, but something close to it. "Rose is my aunt, the woman who raised me after my parents died. When she calls and tells me a woman is being beaten by a man who thinks he's above consequences, I don't charge a rate." He moved closer, pulled a chair over to her bedside, and sat down, bringing himself to eye level with her. "I fix the problem." "The problem," Sophie repeated numbly. "You mean Marcus?" "I mean anyone who thinks they can hurt you and walk away." His gaze held hers, steady and unwavering. "Rose told me this isn't the first time you've been in this hospital, that there's a pattern." "Accidental falls," she said. "A lot of them." Shame burned hot in Sophie's cheeks. "It's complicated." "No," Victor said, and there was steel beneath the gentleness now. "It's not complicated. It's simple. He hurts you. You bleed. The system looks the other way because his family has money and connections." He leaned forward slightly. "But here's what's going to happen now. You're not going back to him. You're not spending one more night under the same roof as a man who puts you in the hospital. And if Marcus Hartley so much as looks at you wrong from this moment forward, he's going to learn exactly how limited his family's connections really are." Sophie stared at him. It sounded too good to be true. It sounded like a fantasy, the kind of rescue scenario she'd stopped letting herself dream about months ago. "You don't understand," she whispered. Marcus, his family. They won't just let me go. If I try to leave, he'll... She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't voice the threats Marcus had made, the things he'd promised he'd do if she ever tried to run. Let me be very clear about something. Victor's voice dropped lower, and despite the gentleness, there was something absolutely lethal in his tone. I don't care who the Hartleys think they are. I don't care how much money they have or which politicians they play golf with. In this city, there are people who matter because of their bank accounts and their family names. He paused. And then there are people who matter because everyone knows what happens if you cross them. Your husband is about to learn which category actually holds power. Rose appeared at the curtain, carrying a clipboard. Her expression was calm and professional, but Sophie caught the quick, assessing look she gave Victor, the tiny nod he returned. Doctors signed off on discharge, Rose said, her tone brisk. But given Mrs. Hartley's injuries, I've recommended 48 hours of supervised recovery. She met Sophie's eyes meaningfully. Can't be too careful with head trauma. She'll need someone to monitor her symptoms. She'll stay at my place, Victor said immediately. I'll make sure she's taken care of. Your place? Sophie's head was spinning, and not just from the concussion. I don't even know you. And Marcus, he'll come looking for me. Let him. There was something almost eager in Victor's expression now, a predatory anticipation that should have terrified her, but somehow didn't. I'm actually hoping he does. I've heard about Marcus Hartley, third-generation rich boy who thinks money means he can do whatever he wants. I've been waiting for a good excuse to teach him otherwise. Rose began unhooking the monitors, her movements efficient. Sophie, honey, I know this is overwhelming, but I've known Victor since he was 8 years old. I've seen him build an empire from nothing. I've seen him protect people who had nowhere else to turn. She paused, her hand gentle on Sophie's shoulder. He's not a good man by most standards, but he's a man who keeps his word. And when he says he'll keep you safe, you can take that to the bank. Why? Sophie looked between them, trying to understand. Why would you do this for me? I'm no one. I'm just... You're someone who needs help, Victor interrupted. And someone hurt you in my city, thinking they could get away with it. That's all the reason I need. He stood, offering her his hand. I'm not going to force you, Sophie. If you want to walk out of here and go back to Marcus, I can't stop you. But if you come with me, I promise you 2 things. 1, he will never touch you again. 2, you'll have time to figure out what you want your life to look like without someone's fist in your face. Sophie looked at his outstretched hand. It was a large hand, scarred across the knuckles, the hand of someone who'd clearly been in more than a few fights. Everything rational in her mind said this was insane. She didn't know this man. Didn't know what he might want from her. Didn't know if she was trading one dangerous situation for another. But she was so tired. Tired of the fear, the pain, the endless cycle of Marcus's apologies followed by his fists. Tired of waking up wondering if this would be the day he went too far. Tired of feeling like she was drowning with no one willing to throw her a line. She took Victor's hand. His grip was firm but careful, mindful of her injuries as he helped her sit up. The room swam for a moment, pain and medication making everything tilt, but Victor's hand on her arm was steady, grounding her. Easy, he murmured. Take your time. Rose brought over a bag with Sophie's clothes and purse, the things she'd arrived with, blood-stained and crumpled. I'll get a wheelchair. Hospital policy. I can walk, Sophie protested weakly. Hospital policy, Rose repeated with a small smile. And honestly, honey, you look like you might fall over if someone breathes on you wrong. Humor an old nurse. While Rose went to get the wheelchair, Victor helped Sophie into a hospital gown that wasn't covered in blood. He turned his back while she changed, giving her what privacy he could in the sterile little curtained area, and Sophie found herself oddly touched by the gesture. A monster, people called him. But Marcus had never bothered with such courtesies, even in the beginning when he'd been playing the charming suitor. Rose returned with the wheelchair and a knowing look in her eyes that said she'd given them the time alone, on purpose. She helped Sophie settle into the chair, tucking a blanket around her legs. "My shift ends in an hour," Rose told Victor. "Call me when you get her settled. And Victor?" She touched his arm. "Thank you. You raised me to protect people who couldn't protect themselves," Victor said quietly. "I'm just doing what you taught me." They made their way through the hospital corridors, Victor walking beside the wheelchair Rose was pushing, his presence drawing stares and whispers. People recognized him, Sophie realized. Hospital staff, other visitors, even some of the patients. And the looks they gave him weren't just fear. There was respect there too. Deference. They were almost to the elevators when a security guard stepped into their path. He was young, barely out of his 20s, with a name tag that read Stevens and uncertainty written all over his face. "Mr. Volkov," he said, his voice cracking slightly. I was told there might be a problem. Mr. Hartley said what?" Victor's tone was mild, but Sophie saw the security guard pale. "He said his wife was being taken against her will, that I should stop anyone from removing her from the hospital." Stevens looked miserable. "I'm supposed to call the police." "Mrs. Hartley is being discharged," Rose said firmly. "She's leaving of her own free will. Isn't that right, Sophie?" All eyes turned to her. Sophie's throat felt tight. This was it. The moment where she could still turn back. She could say she wanted to stay. Wanted to wait for Marcus, and this whole strange interlude would end. She'd go back to her life. Back to the fear and the pain and the certainty that one day Marcus would kill her. Or she could step off the cliff and hope Victor Volkov was as good as his word. "I want to leave," Sophie said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. "With Mr. Volkov, of my own free will." Stevens looked between them, clearly torn between his orders and the very obvious fact that he did not want to get between Victor Volkov and anything Victor wanted. Okay, I'll let Mr. Hartley know." "You do that," Victor said. "And Stevens, tell him if he wants to discuss this further, he knows where to find me." They rode the elevator down in silence. Sophie's hands were shaking, reaction setting in now that the adrenaline was fading. She'd done it. She'd actually left. But what came next? What had she just gotten herself into? The elevator doors opened to the parking garage, and Victor led them to a sleek black car that probably cost more than Sophie had made in the last 5 years. A driver was waiting, a massive man with a shaved head and a scar that bisected one eyebrow. He opened the back door without a word. "This is Alexei," Victor said as he carefully helped Sophie out of the wheelchair and into the car. "He's my head of security. He'll be helping keep an eye on you." Alexei nodded at Sophie, his expression neutral. "Ma'am." Rose squeezed Sophie's hand before she got in. "You're doing the right thing. Be safe. Call me if you need anything, day or night." She pressed a piece of paper into Sophie's palm, a phone number written in precise nurse's handwriting. Then Victor was sliding into the seat beside her, and Alexei was pulling out of the parking garage, and Sophie was watching the hospital disappear behind them with a feeling like standing on the edge of a precipice. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My apartment," Victor said. "Downtown, penthouse level, full security, plenty of space." He glanced at her, and his expression softened slightly at whatever he saw in her face. "There's a guest room. Multiple guest rooms, actually. You'll have privacy. A lock on your door if it makes you feel safer, though I promise you won't need it. And in the morning, when you're feeling better, we'll talk about next steps." "Next steps," Sophie repeated. "Like what?" "Like how you want to handle the divorce, whether you want to press charges against Marcus. What kind of security you'll need going forward." Victor's jaw tightened, like making sure he understands that you're under my protection now, and what that means for anyone who thinks about hurting you. The car wound through the city streets, evening traffic beginning to thicken as the workday ended. Sophie watched the buildings slide past, the familiar landmarks that suddenly felt like they belonged to a different life. A life she was leaving behind. I don't understand why you're doing this, she said quietly. Rose said you're not a good man. Everyone says that. But I'm a criminal, Victor finished for her, his tone matter of fact. I run illegal operations. I break the law regularly. I've hurt people, killed people, done things that would get me life in prison if anyone could prove them. He turned to look at her fully, and his eyes were clear and unflinching. But I have rules, Sophie. Lines I don't cross. And men who beat women, men who use their strength or their money or their power to hurt people who can't fight back, those men violate every rule I have. Because of your parents? Sophie guessed, remembering Rose's mention that she'd raised him. Something shuddered behind Victor's eyes. My father used to beat my mother. Used to put her in the hospital, just like Marcus does to you. And every time she'd go back. She'd believe him when he said it would be different, that he was sorry, that he loved her. His voice had gone flat, emotionless, right up until the night he killed her. I was 8 years old. I watched him do it. Watched him walk away like it was nothing. Sophie's breath caught. Victor. Rose took me in after that, raised me, taught me what strength really was. He looked out the window, his profile sharp against the city lights. I built what I built so I'd never be powerless again, so I could protect people the way no one protected my mother. It's not noble, it's not heroic, but it's what I do. The car pulled up to a gleaming high-rise, all glass and steel and obvious wealth. Alexei came around to open Sophie's door, and Victor helped her out, keeping a careful hand on her elbow as they crossed the lobby. The doorman greeted Victor by name, his eyes widening slightly when he saw Sophie's visible injuries, but quickly schooling his expression to professional neutrality. The elevator ride to the top floor was smooth and silent. Sophie caught her reflection in the mirrored walls and flinched. She looked awful, bruises blooming dark on her pale skin, one eye swollen half shut, her lips split and crusted with blood. She looked like exactly what she was, a victim. But standing next to her, Victor looked like a knife, sharp and dangerous and ready to cut. The penthouse was enormous, all open space and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the glittering city. The furniture was expensive but understated, masculine without being ostentatious. It was the home of someone who had money, but didn't need to prove it. Guest room is this way, Victor said, leading her down a hallway. He opened a door to reveal a spacious bedroom with its own attached bathroom. Everything you need should be in there. Toiletries, clean towels. There's a robe in the closet. He paused. We'll need to get you some clothes tomorrow. For tonight, the robe will have to do. Sophie nodded, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. Now that they were here, now that the immediate danger had passed, her body was remembering all the reasons it hurt. There's one more thing, Victor said. He pulled out his phone, tapped something, and handed it to her. This is my personal number. If you need anything at all, you call me. Day or night. It doesn't matter what time or what you need. I want you to know you're safe here. Sophie took the phone, looking at the number displayed on the screen. Then she realized what he was doing and looked up at him in surprise. You're giving me your phone? You don't have one anymore, do you? Marcus took it. When she nodded mutely, Victor's expression darkened. He probably tracked it. Probably read all your messages. Controlling bastard. He pressed the phone into her hand. This one is clean. Untraceable. Use it. I can't take your phone, Sophie protested weakly. I have others. Victor was already pulling a second phone from his jacket pocket. I always carry backups. This business, you learn to be prepared. He touched her shoulder gently, carefully avoiding the bruises. Get some rest, Sophie. You're safe now, I promise. He left, closing the door quietly behind him, and Sophie was alone for the first time since waking up in the hospital. She sank down onto the bed, a real bed, comfortable and soft, nothing like the hospital mattress, and finally let herself cry. Sophie woke to the smell of coffee and the low murmur of voices. For a confused moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The bed was too comfortable, the room too quiet. Then memory returned. Marcus, the hospital, Victor. And she sat up too quickly, pain shooting through her ribs. Sunlight was streaming through the windows. She'd slept through the night. And for the first time in months, she'd slept deeply, without nightmares, without jerking awake at every sound expecting Marcus's footsteps. The phone Victor had given her showed 7 missed calls and 12 text messages, all from Marcus. Her hands shook as she opened them. "Where are you? Come home right now." "This is ridiculous, Sophie. Stop being dramatic. You're making a huge mistake. That man is dangerous. He's going to hurt you. I'm worried about you. Please call me. I love you. I'm sorry about last night. You know I didn't mean it. Come home and we'll talk about this like adults. You're my wife. You belong here. If you don't come back, you'll regret it. I'm giving you until noon. After that, I'm calling the police and reporting you as a missing person. Final warning, Sophie. Come home." She stared at the messages, at the familiar pattern. Anger, manipulation, false concern, threats, all woven together in a tapestry she'd learned to navigate over 3 years of marriage. Once, those messages would have worked. Once, she would have believed him, would have convinced herself that she'd overreacted, that it was her fault, that if she just went back and apologized, everything would be fine. Now, reading them with the memory of Victor's steady presence and Rose's fierce protection fresh in her mind, they just looked pathetic, desperate. She deleted them. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Sophie?" Victor's voice, muffled through the wood. "I have breakfast if you're hungry. No pressure if you'd rather rest." Sophie looked down at herself. She was still wearing the hospital gown, her hair a tangled mess, her face undoubtedly a disaster zone of bruises. She must look. She caught herself. That was Marcus's voice in her head, telling her she needed to look perfect, needed to be presentable, needed to measure up to his impossible standards. Victor had already seen her at her absolute worst, and he'd helped her anyway. She found the robe in the closet where he'd said it would be, wrapped herself in its soft warmth, and opened the door. Victor was standing in the hallway with a tray. He'd changed from his suit into dark jeans and a gray sweater that somehow made him look both more approachable and more dangerous. His hair was slightly damp, like he'd recently showered. "I wasn't sure what you'd want," he said, indicating the tray, "so I made a bit of everything. Coffee, tea, toast, eggs, fruit." His eyes scanned her face, professional and assessing. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Sophie admitted. "But better than yesterday?" She looked at the phone still clutched in her hand. "Marcus has been calling, texting." Victor's jaw tightened. "What did he say?" "The usual. Threats, apologies, demands that I come back." She met his eyes. "He said he's calling the police, reporting me missing." "Let him." Victor gestured toward the living room. "Come sit down. We need to talk about that anyway." Sophie followed him to the large sectional sofa that faced those floor-to-ceiling windows. In daylight, the city spread out below them like a kingdom, and she realized with a start that she could see her old neighborhood from here. The expensive brownstone where she'd lived with Marcus for 2 years, where every room held a memory of fear and pain. It looked very small from up here. Victor set the tray on the coffee table and poured her coffee without asking, adding cream and sugar in amounts that were exactly right somehow. He must have been paying attention yesterday at the hospital when the nurse brought her water. "I spoke with my lawyer this morning," Victor said, settling onto the opposite end of the sofa, giving her space. "His name is David Chen. He's the best divorce attorney in the city, and he's already started drawing up papers. But before we move forward with that, I need to know what you want." "What I want." Sophie wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, drawing warmth from it. "I want to not be married to Marcus anymore. I want to not be afraid all the time. I want—" Her voice caught. I want to feel like a person again, instead of a possession." "That's what you're going to get," Victor said firmly. "But there are different ways to approach this, and you need to understand your options. We can file for divorce on grounds of abuse, document your injuries, your hospital visits, build a case. It'll take time, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. You'll have to testify. Relive everything." He paused. "Marcus will fight it. His family will throw money at the best lawyers they can find. They'll try to discredit you, make you look unstable. It won't be easy." Sophie's stomach churned. What's the alternative? "We make him want the divorce," Victor said. "We make it very clear that staying married to you is more trouble than it's worth, that continuing this fight will cost him more than just money." His expression was calm, but there was steel underneath. "The Hartleys have business interests all over the city, construction contracts, real estate deals, development projects. A lot of those projects require cooperation from people who don't love being told what to do. People who might be persuaded to make things difficult for the Hartleys if they had the right motivation." "You're talking about using your—" Sophie couldn't quite bring herself to say criminal empire, so she settled for your influence. "I'm talking about applying pressure where it's most effective," Victor corrected. "I'm talking about making Marcus understand that you're not worth the headache. That he can sign the papers, take his lumps, and move on with his life. Or he can fight and watch his family's business interests crumble around him." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not going to lie to you, Sophie. This is dirty. It's not legal. It's not the clean, proper way to do things. But it's fast, and it's effective. And more importantly, it means you don't have to spend a year being dragged through the mud while Marcus's lawyers paint you as a liar and a gold digger." Sophie was quiet for a long moment, processing. Everything she'd been taught said this was wrong. That there was a right way to do things, a legal way, a proper way. But everything she'd been taught had also failed to protect her. The police, the lawyers, the system, none of it had stopped Marcus from hurting her. None of it had even tried. "What would you do?" she asked. "If I said yes?" "First, we'd make sure you're fully protected. Security detail whenever you leave this building. New phone, new email, new bank account in your name only. We'd get you set up with David to start the divorce proceedings. Everything legal and above board there." Victor's expression turned colder. "Then I'd have conversations with some people. Construction unions who work on Hartley projects, city officials who approve their permits, business partners who might suddenly discover they have better opportunities elsewhere. Nothing illegal, nothing traceable. Just a lot of unfortunate coincidences that make it very expensive for the Hartleys to keep operating at their current capacity." "And Marcus?" "Marcus," Victor said, and now his voice had the same lethal edge she'd heard in the hospital, "gets a personal visit from me, where I explain very clearly what happens if he ever comes near you again. What happens if he makes trouble during the divorce? What happens if I so much as hear he's said your name in a way I don't like?" He held her gaze. "I've made men like Marcus back down before, Sophie. Men who thought they were untouchable because of their money or their name. They learned. He'll learn too." It should have scared her. This calm discussion of intimidation and pressure and barely veiled threats. But instead, Sophie felt something unfurling in her chest. Something that felt like relief. Like power. "Will it work?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Victor said without hesitation. "I promise you it will work." Sophie looked out the window at the city, at the neighborhood where she'd been a prisoner for 2 years. Then she looked back at Victor, at this man who was offering her a way out not because he wanted something from her, but because he believed men like Marcus shouldn't get to win. "Do it," she said. Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe. Or respect. "Okay, I'll make the calls." He stood, then paused. "Sophie, once we start this, there's no backing out. Marcus is going to fight. He's going to try to scare you, threaten you, maybe even come after you physically if he's stupid enough. You need to be prepared for that." "I'm prepared," Sophie said, and realized she meant it. For the first time in years, she was ready to fight back. "I'm done being afraid of him." Victor smiled, and it was a sharp, dangerous expression that reminded her exactly who she was aligning herself with. "Good. Then let's take your life back." The next 3 weeks were a blur of activity and transformation. David Chen turned out to be a thin, intense man with wire-rimmed glasses and a mind like a steel trap. He sat with Sophie for hours, documenting everything. Every hospital visit, every bruise, every threat Marcus had ever made. He photographed her healing injuries, collected her medical records, built a case that was airtight and damning. "He's going to try to paint you as unstable," David warned her during one of their sessions. "It's the standard playbook. You were depressed, you were making things up for attention, you were the real abuser. But we have documentation. We have photos. We have Rose's testimony about the pattern of injuries she's seen." He looked at her over his glasses. "And we have Viktor Volkov willing to testify that he personally witnessed Marcus's behavior at the hospital. That carries weight." Meanwhile, Victor was keeping his promises. The security team was everywhere but invisible. Alexei and 3 others who rotated shifts, always watching, always present. Sophie had a new phone, a new bank account with enough money in it to make her gasp when she saw the balance. "A loan," Victor said firmly when she tried to protest. "You'll pay it back when you're on your feet. For now, you need resources." And a laptop set up with email and social media accounts Marcus couldn't access. And Victor himself was a constant, steady presence. He worked from home most days, his office down the hall from the guest room she was staying in. Sometimes she'd hear him on calls, his voice sharp and commanding, speaking in rapid Russian or crisp English, managing an empire she couldn't see but could feel the weight of. But when he emerged, when they'd have dinner together in the evenings, he was just Victor, surprisingly easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor and an unexpected gentleness. He never pushed, never demanded anything from her, just gave her space to heal and time to figure out who she was without Marcus's voice in her head. But Marcus wasn't staying quiet. The calls and texts escalated. Then came the emails, long rambling messages that swung between apology and accusation. He showed up at Victor's building twice, was turned away by security both times. He tried to access Sophie's old email account, her social media, even called her mother in Ohio claiming Sophie had been kidnapped. "He's desperate," David observed during one of their meetings. "Good. Desperate men make mistakes." And Marcus did make mistakes. The biggest one came 3 weeks after Sophie had left him, when he tried to access the apartment building's garage and got into an altercation with Alexei that ended with Marcus on the ground and the police showing up. Victor had called Sophie immediately. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. I'm here in the apartment." Sophie's hands were shaking. "Is Alexei..." "Alexei is fine. He barely touched Marcus, just restrained him when he tried to force his way past. But Marcus is claiming assault." Victor's voice was calm, but she could hear the barely contained anger underneath. "The police are here. They want a statement. From me, if you're willing to give one." Sophie took a breath. This was it. The moment where she could still back down, could still pretend that everything was complicated, and maybe she'd overreacted. Or she could stand up and tell the truth. "I'll come down," she said. Victor met her at the elevator, Alexei beside him with an ice pack pressed to his knuckles where Marcus had apparently tried to punch him. The police were still there, 2 officers, a man and a woman, both looking harassed. And Marcus was there, his suit rumpled, his face flushed with rage. When he saw Sophie, his expression transformed into something that might have been relief if it wasn't so possessive. "Sophie, thank God. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding." He tried to move toward her, but Alexei shifted subtly, blocking the path. Marcus's eyes flashed. "I'm your husband. I have a right to see you." "No," Sophie said, and her voice came out stronger than she felt. "You don't." Marcus's expression crumpled into something ugly. "You can't hide from me forever. I know he's brainwashing you, turning you against me. But you're my wife, Sophie. Mine. And I'm not letting some criminal steal you away. Mr. Hartley, the female officer said wearily, we've been over this. Your wife has the right to leave. You don't have the right to harass her or force your way onto private property. I wasn't forcing. I was trying to see my wife. Is that a crime now? Marcus was spiraling, his voice getting louder, his movements more agitated. You should be arresting him. He pointed at Victor. He's the criminal. Everyone knows what Victor Volkov is. He's probably the one who put these ideas in her head in the first place. I left you, Sophie said clearly. Because you beat me. Because you put me in the hospital. Because I was afraid you were going to kill me. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Marcus seemed shocked, his face going pale. Sophie, he started, but Victor stepped forward, putting himself between Marcus and Sophie with a deliberateness that was almost casual. Officers, Victor said, his tone pleasant and professional. I have security footage of Mr. Hartley attempting to force entry to my building and attacking my employee when he was stopped. Mrs. Hartley has documentation of multiple hospitalizations due to domestic violence, all while she was living with Mr. Hartley, and she's currently in the process of filing for divorce. I'd say that gives you everything you need. The male officer looked between them, clearly weighing his options. Then his gaze settled on Sophie's face, on the fading but still visible bruises. Mrs. Hartley, do you want to press charges against your husband for harassment? Sophie looked at Marcus, really looked at him. 3 years ago, he'd seemed charming, successful, perfect. Now she saw him clearly, a small man who needed to hurt people to feel powerful, a coward who only felt strong when he was making someone else weak. Yes, she said, I want to press charges. Marcus's face went from pale to red. You'll regret this, he snarled. My family, your family, Victor interrupted calmly, is about to have much bigger problems than this. You might want to call your father, Marcus. I believe he's had some interesting news about his construction permits today. Sophie saw the exact moment the meaning hit Marcus. His eyes went wide, then narrow with rage. You son of a... Careful, Victor said softly. There are police present, and you're already in enough trouble. The officers, clearly wanting to be anywhere but in the middle of this, moved to take Marcus's statement. Sophie turned away, not wanting to watch anymore, and found Victor studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You did good, he said quietly. I know that wasn't easy. It was easier than I thought it would be, Sophie admitted. I think I'm finally starting to believe I'm really out. That he can't hurt me anymore. He can't, Victor's voice was absolutely certain. I won't let him. And standing there in the lobby of his building, with Alexei standing guard and the police dealing with Marcus, and the evening sun painting the sky outside in shades of gold and red, Sophie believed him. The divorce papers were filed 2 days later. Marcus fought exactly as David had predicted. His lawyers were expensive and aggressive, claiming Sophie was mentally unstable, that she was making false accusations, that Victor had manipulated her. They demanded she undergo psychiatric evaluation. They subpoenaed her medical records going back years, trying to find evidence of prior mental health issues they could exploit. But David was better. He buried them in documentation, hospital records, photographs, Rose's testimony as a medical professional who'd treated Sophie multiple times. He presented a timeline that was damning in its clarity. 3 years of increasingly severe accidents, each one corresponding with periods where Marcus was under stress or drinking heavily. And behind the scenes, Victor was keeping his other promises. The Hartleys' business interests began experiencing unprecedented difficulties. Building permits were delayed indefinitely. Construction unions suddenly had issues with safety violations on Hartley worksites. Major business partners quietly backed out of deals, citing changing priorities. Sophie saw the results in Marcus's increasingly unhinged communications, which David collected carefully for the case file. Marcus knew who was behind the problems. He knew Victor was dismantling his family's empire piece by piece, and he couldn't do anything about it. He's trying to get to you through your mother, David mentioned during one of their weekly updates. Called her again, claiming you've been kidnapped by the Russian Mafia. Your mother called you, right? Sophie nodded. That conversation had been difficult. Her mother suspicious, confused, worried. But Sophie had been calm, had explained everything clearly, had told her mother the truth about what her marriage had really been like. In the end, her mother had cried and apologized for not seeing it sooner, and promised to tell Marcus to leave her alone if he called again. It had felt like one more piece of her life, clicking back into place. The judge is sympathetic, David continued. We have a preliminary hearing next week. Given Marcus's harassment and the documented history of violence, I'm confident we can get a restraining order. After that, it's just a matter of time until the divorce is finalized. How much time? Sophie asked. In this state, minimum 6 months from filing, but given the circumstances, I'd say we're looking at 8 to 10 before it's completely final. David looked at her over his glasses. That's fast for a contested divorce, Sophie, especially when the other side has money. We're making excellent progress. 8 to 10 months. It seemed like forever and no time at all. Sophie tried to imagine what her life would look like in a year, divorced, free, able to make her own choices without fear. It was hard to picture. She'd been Sophie Hartley for 3 years. Before that, she'd been Sophie Morrison. But who was she now, in between? Who was she becoming? Victor found her that evening sitting in the living room, staring out at the city lights. He'd been out most of the day, some kind of business meeting he'd been deliberately vague about, and he looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. David says the hearing is next week, he said, settling onto the other end of the sofa with a bottle of water. Sophie pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. He thinks we'll get the restraining order. We will. Victor took a long drink, watching her. Something on your mind? I've been here almost a month, Sophie said slowly. Living in your guest room, using your resources, being protected by your people. She turned to look at him. I know you said this wasn't about money, but Victor, I need to start planning for what comes next. For when the divorce is final and I need to get my own place, my own life. I can't keep taking from you indefinitely. You're not taking anything, Victor said, but I understand the need to feel independent. What are you thinking? I had a job before I married Marcus, Sophie said. I was a graphic designer, freelance work mostly. Marcus made me stop when we got married, said I didn't need to work, that my job was to take care of the house and support his career. She laughed bitterly. I should have seen the red flag in that, but I thought it was romantic at the time. Now I realize it was just one more way to control me, to make me financially dependent. You want to go back to design work? I want to do something, Sophie said. I want to feel useful. I want to prove to myself that I can still create something, that 3 years with Marcus didn't break me completely. She hesitated. I thought maybe I could set up a small office here, if that's okay. Start reaching out to old clients, build up my portfolio again. I don't know if anyone will remember me, but I have to try. Victor was quiet for a moment, and Sophie felt a flash of anxiety. Was she overstepping? She was already living in his home, using his resources. Was asking for more too presumptuous? Then Victor smiled, and it was genuine, without the dangerous edge. I think that's a great idea. There's an extra room down the hall from my office, bigger than the guest room, better light. We can set it up as a workspace for you, computer, software, whatever you need. He leaned forward. And Sophie, for what it's worth, I don't think Marcus broke you at all. Hurt you, yes, but you're still here, still fighting, still planning for the future. That's not broken, that's strong. Sophie felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about not being afraid, Victor said. It's about being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. You've been doing that since the day you took my hand in that hospital. You're one of the strongest people I've met. Their eyes met across the sofa, and something shifted in the air between them. Sophie felt it like a physical thing, a pull that made her suddenly hyper-aware of how close they were sitting, how Victor was looking at her with an intensity that had nothing to do with violence or protection, and everything to do with something else entirely. She looked away first, her heart pounding. "Thank you. For everything. For believing me when no one else did. For helping me when you had no reason to." "I had a reason," Victor said quietly. "You needed help." "That's the only reason I've ever needed." But Sophie wondered with a flutter low in her stomach that she hadn't felt in years, if maybe there were other reasons too. Reasons neither of them was quite ready to name yet. The hearing went exactly as David had predicted. The judge took one look at Sophie's medical records, listened to Rose's testimony, reviewed the photographic evidence, and granted the restraining order before Marcus's lawyers could mount any significant objection. Marcus was ordered to stay at least 500 feet from Sophie at all times, was prohibited from contacting her directly or through intermediaries, and was warned in no uncertain terms that any violation would result in immediate arrest. Sophie watched Marcus's face turn an ugly shade of red as the judge read the order, watched him start to protest, then think better of it when the bailiff moved closer. For the first time since she'd met him, Marcus looked small, powerless. "This isn't over," he hissed as they filed out of the courtroom, quiet enough that only Sophie and Victor could hear. "You think a piece of paper means anything? You think he can protect you forever?" Victor stopped walking, turned slowly to face Marcus with an expression so cold it made Sophie's breath catch. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried absolute conviction. "I protected my mother's grave from the man who killed her," Victor said. "Made sure he never walked free for what he did. Made sure he understood, every day for the rest of his miserable life, exactly what he'd taken from me." He smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Sophie had ever seen. "You're nothing compared to him, Marcus. You're a spoiled child playing at being dangerous, and if you ever threaten her again, you'll learn the difference between men who talk about violence and men who actually understand it." Marcus went white. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then turned and practically fled down the courthouse steps, his lawyers scrambling to follow. David waited until they were out of earshot, then let out a low whistle. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, Victor." "I don't have a bad side," Victor said mildly, his expression already returning to its normal composure. "Just different levels of professional interest." He glanced at Sophie. "You okay?" Sophie realized she was shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline rush of watching Marcus finally back down. "I'm perfect," she said, and meant it. They celebrated with lunch at an expensive restaurant where Victor was clearly known and respected, where the owner came out personally to greet them, and the staff treated Sophie like she was someone important, rather than someone to be pitied. For the first time in years, Sophie felt like a person, rather than a victim. "To new beginnings," Victor said, raising his glass of wine. Sophie clinked her glass against his, meeting his eyes. "To freedom." The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Sophie set up her office in the room Victor had offered, spending hours each day rebuilding her portfolio and reaching out to old contacts. To her surprise and delight, people remembered her. Projects started trickling in. A logo redesign here, a website mock-up there. Small jobs, but they were hers. Earned by her own skills, paid into her own account. She was building a life. And increasingly that life included Victor in ways that had nothing to do with protection or gratitude. They'd have dinner together most nights, talking about everything and nothing, her design projects, his legitimate business interests. He owned several restaurants and a property management company, she learned, alongside the less legal enterprises. Their childhoods, their dreams. Victor had a surprising passion for classic literature and could quote Dostoevsky from memory. Sophie discovered she could make him laugh with stories about her disastrous college roommate and her brief, ill-fated attempt at pottery. It was easy, comfortable. And somewhere along the way, comfortable had started to feel like something more. Sophie tried not to think about it. Tried to tell herself she was just grateful, that it was natural to develop feelings for someone who'd saved her. that she needed to focus on her divorce, her independence, her new life. That getting involved with Victor when she was barely free of Marcus would be a terrible idea. But then Victor would smile at her over morning coffee, or his hand would brush hers as they passed in the hallway, or she'd catch him watching her with an expression that made her heart race, and all her careful, rational thoughts would scatter like leaves in the wind. 6 weeks after the hearing, Sophie was working late in her office when Victor knocked on the open door. "It's past midnight," he said. "You should get some sleep." Sophie rubbed her eyes, realizing he was right. She'd been so focused on finishing a website design, she'd lost track of time. "Just wanted to finish this section. The client wants the draft by morning." "Mind if I look?" She gestured him in, and he came to stand behind her chair, leaning over her shoulder to see the screen. He was close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive, could feel the warmth of him at her back. "That's beautiful," Victor said, studying the design. "The color scheme is sophisticated. Clean lines. You're talented, Sophie." "Thank you." She tried to focus on the screen, but her awareness of him was overwhelming. "I forgot how much I loved this. Creating things. Having something that's mine." "You deserve to have things that are yours," Victor said quietly. "You deserve to have a life that makes you happy." Sophie turned in her chair to look up at him, and found him closer than she'd expected. Close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of late nights and heavy responsibilities. "Victor," she said, and wasn't sure what she was asking. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and Sophie found herself leaning into the touch without meaning to. "I'm trying very hard," Victor said, his voice low and rough, "to be the kind of man who doesn't take advantage. You're vulnerable. You're healing. You've been through hell. The right thing to do is give you space and time, and let you figure out what you want without any pressure from me." "And if I already know what I want?" Sophie asked, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. Victor's hand stilled against her face. "Sophie, I'm not confused," she interrupted. "I'm not mistaking gratitude for something else. I'm not so damaged that I can't tell the difference between a rescuer and someone I actually care about." She stood up, bringing them face to face, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "You've been patient. You've given me space. You've never pushed or demanded or expected anything from me. And that's why—" She took a breath. "That's why I trust you. Why I want this. Want you." "You're still married," Victor said, but his thumb was stroking along her cheekbone now, a gentle touch that made her shiver. "The divorce isn't final." "I stopped being Marcus's wife the moment I took your hand in that hospital," Sophie said. "A piece of paper might say otherwise. But in every way that matters, I'm not his. I haven't been for months." She put her hand over Victor's where it rested against her face. "Tell me you don't feel this too. Tell me I'm imagining it." "You're not imagining it," Victor said roughly. "I've been fighting it since the day I met you, telling myself all the reasons this was a bad idea, that you needed protection, not complications, that I was too dangerous, too dark, too damaged to be good for someone like you." His other hand came up to frame her face, holding her gently, like she was something precious. "But God help me, Sophie. I've been falling for you since you looked at me in that hospital room and decided to trust me. And I don't know how to stop." Sophie's breath caught. "Then don't stop." Victor made a sound low in his throat, something between a groan and a laugh. "You're going to be the death of me. Or the life of you," Sophie whispered. And then Victor was kissing her, and Sophie was kissing him back, and it was nothing like kissing Marcus had been. Marcus had kissed like he owned her, like he was taking something. Victor kissed like he was offering something. Tenderness and passion and a promise all wrapped together. His hands stayed gentle, cradling her face like she might break, even as the kiss deepened into something that made Sophie's knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said. "Good," Sophie replied. "I want everything to change." The final divorce hearing was scheduled for 8 months after Sophie had left Marcus, exactly as David had predicted. In that time, Sophie's life had transformed in ways she couldn't have imagined. Her design business was thriving. She had regular clients now, enough work that she was considering hiring an assistant. She'd reconnected with old friends Marcus had isolated her from, made new friends through her work, even started having coffee every week with Rose, who'd become something like a surrogate mother. And there was Victor. They'd taken things slowly at first, both aware of the complexity of the situation, of Sophie's need to process her trauma and Victor's desire to make sure she was choosing him freely, not out of dependence or gratitude, but slowly had gradually become something deeper, something neither of them could deny. Now, standing in the courthouse in a navy dress that actually fit her properly, she'd gained back the weight she'd lost during the worst of the abuse, her body finally her own again. Sophie felt ready. Ready to close this chapter. Ready to be officially, legally free. Marcus was there with his lawyers, looking haggard. The months hadn't been kind to him. Hartley Construction had lost 3 major contracts. His father had been forced to sell off several properties at a loss. Marcus himself had been arrested twice for violating the restraining order, once for showing up at Sophie's old gym, once for sending her letters through a friend. He looked at Sophie now with something that might have been longing or might have been resentment, and Sophie felt nothing. No fear, no anger, no guilt. Just a faint pity for a man who'd had every advantage and had chosen to use his power to hurt people weaker than himself. The hearing itself was brief. David had done his job perfectly. The case was airtight. The judge granted the divorce, awarded Sophie a substantial settlement that David had negotiated, though Sophie planned to donate most of it to domestic violence charities, and made the restraining order permanent. It was over. "Congratulations," David said as they left the courtroom. "You're officially Sophie Morrison again. How does it feel?" Sophie tested the name in her head. Sophie Morrison. The person she'd been before Marcus, but also someone new, someone stronger. "It feels like freedom," she said. Victor was waiting outside, leaning against his car with Alexei beside him. When he saw Sophie, his expression transformed into something that made her heart skip. Pride, relief, and something softer that she'd learned to recognize as love, even if neither of them had said the word yet. She walked straight to him, and Victor pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "It's done?" he asked. "It's done." Sophie pulled back just enough to see his face. "I'm free." "You've been free for months," Victor said. "This was just making it official." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I'm proud of you for fighting for this, for not giving up. I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have," Victor corrected gently. "You're stronger than you think, Sophie. I just gave you a safe place to remember that." He smiled. "But I'm very glad I was here to help." They went back to the penthouse, to home, because that's what it had become, and Sophie changed out of the dress into comfortable clothes. She found Victor in the living room, standing by those floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city. "I've been thinking," she said, coming to stand beside him. "Dangerous activity," Victor teased, but his expression was serious. "I want to use some of the settlement money to start something," Sophie said. "A resource center for women leaving abusive relationships. Not a shelter? There are shelters. But somewhere they can get help with design work, job training, legal advice. Somewhere they can start rebuilding their professional lives." She looked at him. "Rose told me you have a foundation. Legitimate charity work. Mostly focused on children and education. I think that's a perfect idea," Victor interrupted. "And yes, the foundation can help. We have resources, connections, lawyers who do pro bono work." He turned to face her fully. "But Sophie, if you're doing this, I want you to do it because it's what you want, not because you feel obligated to justify the help you received." "It's what I want," Sophie said firmly. "I know what it's like to feel trapped, to think there's no way out. I want to give other women what you gave me. A chance, an option, a path forward. She smiled. Besides, I'm going to need something to do with my time, now that I'm not spending it on divorce proceedings. I can think of some ways you could spend your time, Victor said, his tone lighter now, with an edge of suggestion that made Sophie's pulse quicken. Oh? She stepped closer to him. Such as? Victor's hands settled on her waist, pulling her against him. Well, there's your business, and the new resource center, and spending time with my aunt, who absolutely adores you. He paused, his expression turning more serious, more vulnerable. And maybe, if you wanted, spending time figuring out what this is between us, what it could be. Sophie's heart was racing now. What do you want it to be? Everything, Victor said simply. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to come home to you every night. I want to support your dreams and have you be part of mine. I want... He stopped, took a breath. I want this to be real, Sophie. Not just convenient or comfortable or born out of crisis. Real. It is real, Sophie said, emotion tightening her throat. Victor, I love you. She saw the impact of those words hit him, saw something fierce and possessive and tender flash across his face. Say that again. I love you, Sophie repeated more confidently now. You're not just the person who saved me. You're the person who gave me back myself, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, who showed me what it's like to be with someone who actually respects me, values me, sees me as an equal rather than a possession. She put her hand over his heart, feeling it beating fast beneath her palm. You're dark and dangerous, and you do things I probably shouldn't ask too many questions about. But you're also kind and protective, and you make me laugh, and you read Dostoevsky, and you call your aunt every Sunday. And I love all of it. All of you. Victor kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of promise. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing. Marry me, he said. Sophie blinked. What? Marry me, Victor repeated. Not now. You just got divorced. You need time. I understand that. But someday, when you're ready, when you've had time to build your life, and be independent and be absolutely sure this is what you want. His hands tightened on her waist. Because I'm sure, Sophie. I'm sure that you're the only person I want. The only person I'll ever want. And I need you to know that. Need you to know that when you're ready, I'll be here, waiting to make this permanent. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Happy tears this time, not the fearful ones she'd shed so many times before. You don't do anything halfway, do you? Not when it matters, Victor said. Not when it comes to you. So what do you say? Will you marry me? Eventually? Sophie laughed through her tears. Eventually? Yes. Eventually, when I've had time to be just me for a while, when I know who Sophie Morrison is without being anyone's wife. Eventually, when we've dated and fought and made up and built a life together that's ours, not born out of crisis. She pulled him down for another kiss. Eventually, Victor Volkov, I will absolutely marry you. I can work with eventually, Victor murmured against her lips. I'm a patient man when I want something. Somehow I doubt that, Sophie said, laughing. Well, Victor conceded with a wicked smile. Maybe not that patient. That evening they had dinner with Rose, who took one look at their joined hands and smug expressions and immediately demanded to know what had happened. When they told her about the proposal, the eventual proposal, she cried and hugged them both and declared that she'd known from the first moment they were perfect for each other. You saved her, Rose said to Victor. She saved herself, Victor corrected. I just gave her the space to do it. You saved each other, Rose said firmly, and that's how it should be. 3 months later, Sophie opened the Morrison Resource Center in a building Victor's foundation had renovated specifically for the purpose. It offered job training, design workshops, legal consultations, and counseling for women leaving abusive relationships. Sophie ran it with a staff of 5, all women who'd been through their own struggles and wanted to help others find their way out. Rose volunteered there twice a week, using her nursing skills to provide basic health screenings and connect women with medical resources. Alexei and the other security team members took turns teaching self-defense classes. Even Victor got involved, though he stayed mostly behind the scenes, using his connections to secure job placements and housing for women who needed a fresh start. It was everything Sophie had hoped it would be, a way to take her pain and transform it into something that helped others, a way to make meaning from trauma. And through it all, Victor was there, not hovering, not controlling, but present, a steady, solid support that Sophie could lean on when she needed it, but never felt suffocated by. They built a life together that was theirs, full of late-night conversations and shared dreams and laughter, and the kind of simple, everyday intimacy that Sophie had never thought she could have. On the 1-year anniversary of the day Sophie had left Marcus, Victor took her back to the hospital where Rose worked. Not to the ER, but to the roof, which had been transformed with string lights and candles and a table set for 2. "What is this?" Sophie asked, looking around in wonder. "I bribed maintenance," Victor said, pulling out her chair. "I wanted to bring you back to where we started. Back to the place where you decided to trust me." He knelt beside her chair, taking her hand. "1 year ago, you took a chance on me. You put your life in my hands, and you let me help you find your way back to yourself. And every day since then has been the greatest privilege of my life." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a single diamond set in platinum. "I know we said eventually," Victor continued. "But it's been a year, Sophie. A year of watching you bloom and grow and become the woman you were always meant to be. A year of falling more in love with you every single day. And I don't want to wait anymore." His ice blue eyes held hers, full of emotion. "I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you always know you're loved, valued, cherished. I want to be your partner in everything. I want to build an empire with you, but the kind that actually matters. A family, a home, a legacy of helping people find their strength." He took a breath. "Sophie Morrison, will you marry me? For real this time, not eventually?" Sophie was crying again, happy tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Victor. Yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly, catching the light from the candles and string lights. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness she'd come to expect from him, and Sophie thought about how far she'd come. From a woman broken and afraid, trapped in a nightmare with no way out, to this, standing on a rooftop with the man she loved, a ring on her finger, a business that was changing lives, and a future full of infinite possibility. "I love you," she whispered against Victor's lips. "I love you too," he replied. "Always." Below them, the city sparkled with lights, full of people living their lives, making their choices, finding their own paths. And somewhere in one of those buildings, in a hospital room on the 4th floor, another woman was probably lying in a bed, hurt and afraid, wondering if there was any way out. Sophie hoped that woman would find her Rose, her Victor, her chance. But mostly she hoped that woman would find what Sophie had found, the strength to save herself and the courage to accept help when it was offered. Because in the end, that's what freedom really was. Not being alone, not doing it all yourself, but knowing you had the power to choose your own path and the wisdom to walk it with people who genuinely wanted you to succeed. Sophie had chosen her path, and it had led her here, to this rooftop, to this moment, to this man, and this life and this brilliant, terrifying, perfect future. She wouldn't change a single thing.